Hello everybody, SlimKirby here, and I'm going on a long journey of trying to complete every single Game Boy Advance game in North America. This is the story of the highs, the lows, and all the silly stuff in between for the Game Boy Advance completion experience. This is GB Ace. Game number 32, The Invincible Iron Man. Well, I suppose it was only a matter of time before we got our first superhero game. Okay, superhero I guess is subjective, but the first Marvel Comics superhero game. And while you'd probably expect Spider-Man, X-Men, or heck, even the Fantastic Four, we actually managed to start with Iron Man today, which, yeah, probably not my first choice, but at least I recognize the name, I guess. Could have been Folding Chair Man or the Cringler or something of that obscurity. The Invincible Iron Man was released in North America in December of 2002, developed by Taurus Games and published by Activision. Our history with Activision aside, we have actually had this developer before too, as we spent some time with Taurus when we did Duke Nukem Advance like 22 games ago. And aside from alien sex farms, I think we had a good time with that one, so this one shouldn't be too different, right? Well, before we get to that, I should probably go over my extensive history with the Iron Man franchise. I got nothing. Yeah, as I've mentioned before, I was more of a gamer during my younger years, and I didn't really gravitate towards comic books or anime much, even though it would have likely been my cup of tea in some respects. In fact, I'd say the only comic book superheroes I knew much about were Spidey and the X-Men, and that's really only because of the popular movies that were relevant at the time, not really the printed media themselves. So I was up the creek without a paddle on this one, or rather in an iron factory without iron-making tools, or something to that effect. The basic completion goal of this game is just to beat it, so there's really not much to write home about here. In fact, I'd say there really wasn't much to write about in general when it came to this game to begin with. I mean, look at how bare this main menu is. Just start, continue, sound, and bonus, which bonus is really just a gallery, the credits, and a level select feature when you beat the game, so it seemed like there was very minimal effort here in making a fully fleshed out game. As far as the plot is concerned, well, I'll be real, I have no idea if this was supposed to be based on a movie or comic storyline from the Iron Man universe or not. That's kind of why I mentioned I had literally zero exposure to this series in the first place, and nobody in chat was really giving me a definitive answer on this either, nor did any of the wiki pages I looked up after the fact. But, basically, Tony Stark, who may or may not be Iron Man, has noticed that one of his trademark suits of armor has gone missing. Thankfully, he planned to locate her on that armor just in case something like this were to happen. Tony tracks the location over to the docks. He dons on one of his backup suits and goes to retrieve his armor before the enemy can learn how to take full advantage of the suit and master it. Apparently it's very dangerous if it falls into the wrong hands, so let's get going. Level 1 begins, and as I kind of expected, the game kind of plays like an action-adventure run-and-gun, something like Mega Man or Contra to give an example. At a basic level, Iron Man can jump, move, and fire his blaster. He can also expel a little extra propulsion out of his feet to give himself a double jump or even perform a dash jump maneuver as well. Overall, it didn't feel too bad to move or control Iron Man. It was no Mega Man X or anything, but believe me, I've definitely played much worse controlling games that had a premise like this. Metal Warriors! Now, it's quite obvious that you'll be fighting and blowing up a lot of enemies while you'll be doing this, and, well, let's just say even that might be understating things a little bit. There are so many freaking enemies in this game. Literally every step you take could spawn a new one on screen, and so many of them have a lot of health too, which means you might be shooting at them a bit before they go down. Listen, if you're going into this game with the mindset, I'm gonna destroy everything and not take any damage whatsoever, yeah, good effing luck with that. I swear to you. Now, thankfully, Iron Man does take a reasonable amount of hits, and the levels themselves do provide a ton of health pickups as well, But still, I find it pretty ironic that the game called The Invincible Iron Man just so happen to provide many instances of taking damage. Yeah, not so invincible anymore, are you, Tony, old boy? The blaster also has a really interesting gimmick where, while it never really runs out of ammo, it does have an electrical charge meter associated with it. And as you use your weapon consistently, the meter will empty out. And if you have nothing left, you won't be able to use it until you get some more energy to recharge it. You can do this by collecting energy pickups or by just walking around naturally for it to restore, which I guess is okay. I see what they were going for anyway. They didn't want players to just endlessly spam the fire button the whole time and make the combat a little deeper than it would be in other games of this genre. But at the same time, since the enemies were such health sponges, it also kind of slowed the pacing down a bit as well, which definitely made it a little less fun overall. The first level by itself wasn't too bad. It pretty much introduces you to all I spoke about just now anyway, and doesn't really have anything too difficult or complicated to deal with. In addition to the usual health and weapon energy pickups, you can also find some other collectibles as well. There's a power-up that, funnily enough, does turn you into the Invincible Iron Man, where nothing will hurt you while the power-up persists. And you can also apparently find some artwork for the game hidden in select levels throughout the adventure, which will give you something to look forward to in the game's gallery in the bonus menu after the fact. Something you could look as the game's 100% completion condition, but definitely not something I was aiming for in this playthrough. I'm telling you that right now. But yeah, aside from that, there's really not much else to explain here, so let's just keep things moving and see how long this lasts. Level 1 gets completed rather quickly, and Level 2 is pretty much more of the same, at least until the end anyway. I guess I'll take this time to talk about the graphics and music really quickly, just because there really isn't much to discuss here to begin with. The graphics themselves are alright, nothing really that groundbreaking, but they're serviceable for the times, I suppose. It definitely seems like they spent more time focusing on the general animations for Iron Man himself, and much less on everything else, and I suppose there were some parts where they could have done a little better with adding better details to the foregrounds and backgrounds. Heck, in the first level, there was a wall that I could just walk or jump through, and it looked no different from another wall that I couldn't do that with, and while it seemed like something you could just deduce your way through, because how else would you have gotten what was behind that wall? I don't know. To me, that just kind of comes across as laziness than good conscious level design. I was also kind of back and forth on the music, too. The tunes themselves seemed like they were good, but they also just seemed to repeat too often, or give the impression that the music was really trying to build up to something just for it to never really do so, which made it kind of disappointing in that regard. The sound effects were kind of fun to listen to, though. I especially like the sound clip that plays whenever you die. Just seems so over the top for no reason at all. So yeah, while this was not the worst overall presentation on the Game Boy Advance, it definitely could have been a lot better as well. Getting back to level 2, we make it to the end of the level and get completely taken off guard by a boss that shows up out of nowhere, and I was definitely not ready for it. Yeah, it kind of just appeared and started a boss fight before I even knew we were in a boss fight. Ended up taking a few deaths to this guy too, but really he wasn't that hard, just had to get a feeling for his attack patterns and arrive in the arena with just enough health to not be worried about anything else. We check in with Tony after the fight, and it seems that he has a hunch that his cousin Morgan Stark might be responsible for the missing armor. And it seems that he has uploaded the suit's data to another location, which means we need to make haste in an effort to prevent our enemies from getting the true source of our power. We follow the path of the satellite towards a mountain range, and we end up at level 3, which is kind of a woodland forest area. In this third level, I make 2 discoveries. One, there is actually a new kind of collectible we can get that basically gives Iron Man kind of a screen nuke laser of sorts. I honestly thought we had to use this to make progress too, since there were sections of trees we had to break through in this level, but it turns out you can simply just charge into them and the weak parts of the tree will go down in that fashion too. Oh well, at least we have another tool in our arsenal to take care of enemies now, I guess. And for 2, on the subject of charging, it's also worth mentioning that I actually discovered you could do some pretty cool dash maneuvers with your rocket-propelled legs as well. Doing stuff like performing a dash jump into an air dash, that kind of thing. Now, I never found this really too helpful at all at the end of the day, but it was still pretty cool to do regardless, and there are probably some sections where you could use this effectively to avoid enemies and maybe potentially sequence break a few things. It was just hard to find those moments in this level in particular, as it had a lot of awkward platforming on moving platforms, and a lot of narrow sections you had to travel through, and not really skip over. I was able to use it to skip over a few enemies though, and at the end of the level I was pretty low on health, so it did give me some comfort in being able to kind of maneuver around some of this enemy spam. Level 3 completed, and on to level 4, which was pretty much more of the same as the last level. Exciting. It definitely seemed like this level had a very strict 2-level act structure for each of its worlds, or biomes in this case, followed by a boss fight. Kind of akin to Sonic the Hedgehog, I guess you could say, just with this game having, much less fun. At the end of level 4, we run into the boss, and it happens to be someone Iron Man is familiar with. It's not his cousin, but rather one of his major antagonists in the form of Blizzard, which means Morgan was wrapped up in a bit more than meets the eyes, huh? Well, either way, we decide to chase Blizzard from there and head on over to the Snowy Mountains for the next biome. Levels 5 and 6 continue to not really do much for me, but hey, we're dealing with the snowy area now, so that's something, I guess. Yeah, this game was just not doing a lot for me, and it's a shame because I do think it could have at least been a decent run-and-gun game. But the constant need to slow down and recharge your weapon, along with the massive number of enemies and the sheer amount of health they had, it just became a very slow process of move a little bit, stop and take out an enemy or enemies, move a little bit again, potentially get healing pickups as needed, and quite literally repeat the same agonizing process. Yeah, it just wasn't that fun. I think one thing that really could have helped is if they just removed the concept of contact damage, and only allowed you to take damage from enemy attacks and projectiles. At least in that instance, you could make use of Iron Man's movements to kind of slip through enemies if you were really needing to get some health, or were just not in an advantageous position to take care of enemy swarms. Being so vulnerable really just kind of made the game seem like it should have been called the not-so-invincible Iron Man, which me and my stream chat started calling this game after the fact. Once we make it through stage 6, I'm shocked to see that there wasn't a boss fight at the end. And that's because the entire next stage is dedicated to just the boss fight itself. Interesting choice to change that up now, but on further reflection, I'm glad they made that the case here, because getting a game over and having to do an entire stage over again alongside the boss fight would have probably brought up some SlimKirby rages in the chat, or just in the stream in general, not gonna lie. Because my god, this boss fight annoyed the crap out of me. You have to take out Blizzard here, and while he isn't too hard to track down in his fast-moving cloud, at certain points in this fight he'll head to his little base, hide in a containment structure, and heal any damage you've put on him during the fight, and he's completely invulnerable during this maneuver. For a couple of attempts, I could not figure out how to stop him from doing this, as whenever I tried interacting with his little healing fort, nothing seemed to happen, and also during this phase, many swarms of icicles will start falling from the top of the screen as well, meaning you have to dodge while also trying to drag him back out onto the battlefield again. Eventually I realized that you will stop his healing move if you shoot the structure enough, and if you do it quickly, he won't heal much as a result either, so over time you can do enough damage to him to take him down. It just may take a little while. But yeah, we finally took out Blizzard, and we can move on to the next area. Damn that boss fight though. Really spent a lot of time on that for no reason. Hey, guess what? The game is still not over yet. However, I will say that this is the last world of the game, so we are getting there, as defeating Blizzard leads us to the enemy headquarters. Unfortunately though, this last world and the last two stages were painfully long and tedious. Remember how I ranted about the last level just being very slow to get through, the whole move and stop mentality? Yeah, these levels were even worse about it just because you had to navigate long, narrow hallways that had these stretches of gameplay constantly. And the enemies, since we are on the last stage, were pretty dangerous and did a lot of damage too, so it was a struggle getting through these parts. I also found that health pickups were starting to become a little less common to find too, which I understand it's the last part of the game after all, it should probably be difficult, but seriously, I was just kind of done with this game at this point, and just wanted to get out of it if I'm being honest with you. But no, the game did everything it could to keep me around as long as possible. In addition to dying a few times, I had a game over at the top of this elevator section during level 8, which means I had to do the entire level over again. Thankfully, there aren't limited continues, and the punishment is just starting that particular stage over, so it in theory could have been a lot worse, but having to do the entire stage over again was very demoralizing, especially when I learned that I was pretty much right at the end too, so yeah, rip me for that run. On the salty run back though, I was able to achieve victory, which means it was time to move on to the final boss. Well, for all you Iron Man fans out there, we have the Crimson Dynamo for our final challenge, Iron Man's arch nemesis. I assume that's the case anyway, as that's how the game introduces him, but still, with my lack of knowledge, someone could say Iron Man's weakness is a jar of mayonnaise, and I could probably be convinced of that, no joke. Anyway, because we took our sweet time in the last few levels, not that I had really much of a choice, our suit of armor has been fully uploaded to the server, and its data has already been used in the collaboration process of his suit. So now Crimson Dynamo can be referred to as Crimson Iron Dynamo Man, or not, because that's stupid, but either way, the point is that he is nearly invincible now, and can even absorb our weapons if we try to fight him. Well, crap, what do we do then? Well, I guess we could use the screen nuke bombs to temporarily stun Crimson and then simply boost into him and... Oh, okay, that actually works. Well, okay then. So yeah, a very interesting and weird boss fight that does admittedly take a little bit of puzzle solving to figure out, but considering there isn't much to work with really, I guess it's not too bad of a solution to this. Still really weird though. After we finally tackle him to death, Crimson's suit starts to have an energy reaction and gets overloaded to the point where it's literally about to explode. We get the hell out of Dodge, and thank God the resulting explosion not only takes care of Crimson and his headquarters for the time being, but also destroys the enemy's information database, which removes all information about our suit as well. Well, I guess that takes care of that problem, huh? We'll just have to be a little more secure with our armor just so it doesn't get stolen again. Which, speaking of that, whatever happened to our cousin Morgan in this storyline? Once Blizzard comes into play, Morgan isn't even mentioned again. Is he evil? Was he tricked into working for the enemy here? I honestly couldn't tell you. Someone who probably knows more of the lore of this franchise might have a better idea, but this game just kind of drops that plot point entirely for, well, whatever this is. Well, at the very end of the day, though, that was the final boss, which means we can now draw the credits and finally mention the words, game complete. Yeah, this game was not very good. Not the worst thing I've played in this challenge. Yeah, that's right, Pet Resort is still the very deserved king of that accolade. But this game was very underwhelming and had some very questionable design choices. However, I do think a lot of those really bad aspects could be fixed if they just didn't have contact damage. Not that it would have saved the game or anything, no, it's still pretty lackluster and boring, but as it stands in this state, it's also just too short to make any sort of lasting impact, even if it could implement those fixes in some way. There's also only 8 levels, but it's really only 4 pairs of 2 when you really break it down, as the first and second level of each biome didn't really have anything major stand out between the two, aside from the fact that the second level was usually the longer and more difficult stage. So yeah, just not a really huge amount of variety here. The boss fights had some interesting ideas going on, but even the execution in that light felt lacking too. And I do think Iron Man controlled pretty nicely, but it was hard to enjoy that control when you had to pretty much drag gameplay down to a halt through so much of the game, either to clear out enemies or just recharge his weapon from time to time. The game doesn't really offer much beyond just the standard completion either though. If you can get past all the blemishes, you can try to find all the pieces of artwork for the in-game gallery, I guess. I assume there's a piece of art in each standard level because there are 8 pictures and 8 levels, so the map definitely checks out there. I only found about half of them in my playthrough, but I honestly didn't care to find the others. I wouldn't say they're too hard to find though. The one I found in level 8 was kinda convoluted to get, as I felt like I had to move through a fake wall into out of bounds territory or something, but I wouldn't say the levels are too hard to explore if you did want to look through everything. Oh, and when you beat the game, you get a level select feature where you can go to any level you want to and, well, play it again. Yeah, how exciting! Not? Let's just get this over with. For game quality and enjoyability, I gave both categories a 1 out of 5. I considered changing my score to a 1.5 at a certain point, but I don't know. Even if there was potential here, I just don't think the developers really cared that much about the license they were representing here, and I think it shows in both substance and execution. It was just a really disappointing experience. For game difficulty, I initially thought about giving this a 3.5 out of 5, but I think I will lower this to a 3 just because it does have infinite continues and only punishes you by starting the stage over, and I really only experienced this frustration at the end of the game, which is probably where you should be experiencing some kind of resistance anyway. Most of the difficulty just comes from dealing with all the game throws at you, and needing to be super careful at all times, something that could be quite challenging if you have a hard time controlling your patience. But yeah, that was my adventure of beating the Invincible Iron Man. Unfortunately for him, but probably thankful for us, this was the only chance he got for the Game Boy Advance. So there will not be any more Iron Man games for this system or challenge, unless he somehow appears in like a superhero spin-off or something. But I'm sure there'll also be lots of other superhero games in the future too, and just other licensed games in general. In fact, we could get another license for our next game too, so why don't we take a look at that and see what we get for the next game of this challenge. Okay guys, thank you for watching this summary. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave a comment and or like on the video, as those will really help me in these videos out. And stay tuned for future summaries of this series. If you also want to watch full playthroughs of these games for this challenge, check out the video description for a full playlist of everything that's been uploaded and exported so far. And if you're curious about what I'm playing right now for the challenge, be sure to stop by my Twitch channel to see what my current progress is. Just be warned, I'll be a lot further ahead of where we are for these summaries, so keep that in mind. This has been SlimKirby in the GBA series, and I'll talk to you fine people next time. Later, folks.